Hello and welcome to Mona Reads. This is Mona Eltahawy, and as always, fuck the patriarchy. Every Tuesday I read to you from my first book, Headscarves and Hymens, Why the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution. This book, my first, came out in April 2015. So almost exactly, just a little over exactly 5 years ago. And today I am reading from the chapter called One Hand Against Women. Each chapter begins with an epigraph that is a quote from a poem, from an essay, something they said by a feminist who is a favorite of mine, who I find very inspirational. And definitely one of those figures is the source of the epigraph for this chapter, and it is the Black lesbian poet and intellectual and feminist Audrey Lorde. This is from her poem, A Litany for Survival. For those of us who were imprinted with fear like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk. For by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hoped to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. We were never meant to survive. Almost 100% of Egyptian girls and women report being sexually harassed. A 2013 United Nations report cites the actual figure at 99.3%, but my friends joke that the remaining 0.7% had their phones turned off when the United Nations tried to reach them. Before leaving her home, every woman I know braces herself for the obstacle course of offensive words, groping hands, and worse that awaits her in the streets she takes to school, university, and work. Let me adjust my phone here so you can see me better. The same UN study also reported that about 96.5% of Egyptian women have experienced unwelcome physical contact, while 95.5% have been subjected to verbal harassment on the streets. In Yemen, the activist Amal Basha published a study asserting that 90% of Yemeni women have experienced harassment, specifically pinching, groping, sexual assault. Quote, the religious leaders are always blaming the women, making them live in a constant state of fear because out there, someone is following them, end quote. Basha told the Associated Press. If a harassment case is reported in Yemen, Amal Basha added, traditional leaders interfere to cover it up, remove the evidence, or terrorize the victim. It's worth noting that nearly all women in Yemen are covered from head to toe. I would never connect a woman's outfit with any unwanted physical contact or verbal abuse, but our conservative societies do. The extraordinarily, I can't say that word, high incidence of harassment in Yemen gives the lie to the conservatives who claim women bring harassment on themselves by dressing immodestly. Those high incidents of harassment in Yemen give the lie to the conservatives who claim women bring harassment on themselves by dressing, quote unquote, immodestly. Levels of street sexual harassment have soared throughout the Arab world, and everyone asks why. One answer, always met with howls of denial from conservatives, is that the more women cover up, the more it lets men off the hook. The purity culture that exists across the Middle East and North Africa burdens girls and women with the responsibility for their own safety from sexual violence and for ensuring they don't tempt boys and men. Purity culture is a term I first came across in the United States, where it's used to describe the religious right wing's rhetoric that stresses virginity and modesty as the way for women in the United States to attain quote unquote purity. I find it very appropriate as a way to describe the pressure women in the Middle East and North Africa are subjected to, and that phrase purity culture reminds us how much the global religious right wing has in common. The religious right wing in the United States, the religious right wing in the Middle East and North Africa, and the religious right wing across the world. Nisma al-Khattab, a 24-year-old lawyer at Cairo's Shihab Center, which advocates for girls and women, told me of the hurdles girls and women face in fighting back against street sexual harassment. Quote, their mother tells them, cover up so that you don't face harassment. The grandma tells them, you're a girl, don't fight back, just shut up and take it. And their father tells them, don't speak out against harassment because those boys you spoke out against will go and beat up your brother. End quote. Remember the conversation I had with the woman in the niqab on the Cairo metro? I read about this in my last Mona Reads, where a woman saw me in hijab and she, wearing niqab, asked me why I wasn't wearing niqab, and I said, isn't my hijab enough? And she said, if you want to eat candy, would you eat candy with a wrapper or an unwrapped candy? To which I replied, I am a woman, I am not candy. Remember the conversation I had with the woman in the niqab on the Cairo metro? Take that kind of thinking to an absurd and dangerous extreme, and you end up with the leaflets that the feminist activist Shahrazad Maghrabi found being distributed outside girls' schools in the Libyan cities of Tripoli and Benghazi in 2014. She spoke to me for a BBC World Service radio documentary I made with a producer called Gemma Newby on women and the revolutions in the region. Those leaflets outside of the girls' schools begin with two bizarre monologues just juxtaposed. First, a rose describes how it is easily found on every street corner, it's cheap to buy, etc. Next, a pearl talks about how special it is because it's nestled within a shell and deep under the ocean so that no one can see it. In other words, the rose isn't special because everyone can see it and has access to it, but the pearl is precious because it's hidden away. Maghrabi told me, they're doing great harm. They're using Islam as a weapon, as a tool. They say if you're a woman and you go out, you're going to hell. What I'm worried about, she said, is the way they're feeding the people that it's haram. You see girls 6 years old wearing headscarves. You go to school and if a teacher has boy pupils over the age of 6, the teacher must cover her face to teach. I am Libyan. I was born here. I never left. What the hell are they talking about? End quote. This purity culture leads both men and women to unjustly blame women for the harassment they suffer. Women are criticized and they criticize and police one another for wearing clothes that are too tight or the wrong color or the wrong length or the wrong style. It's always the woman's fault. Anything a woman does to alter her own appearance is taken as an incentive to abuse. According to a survey conducted by the Riyadh-based King Abdulaziz Center for National Dialogue, 86.5% of Saudi men blame, quote, women's excessive makeup for the rising cases involving molestation. In a survey carried out in 2008 by the women's rights activist Nihad Abul Qumsan's Egyptian Center for Women's Rights, the majority of the 2,000 Egyptian men and women that were surveyed blamed women for bringing street sexual harassment upon themselves, saying that harassment resulted because of how women were dressed. The center also reported that 62% of Egyptian men admitted admitted to harassing women, but perhaps saddest of all of the findings in this survey, unlike foreign women, most Egyptian women agreed that women should keep harassment to themselves to avoid ruining their reputations. To insist on modesty as a prerequisite for safety on the street is victim blaming with disregard for the facts of street sexual harassment. It also endangers the lives of women who do not dress as modestly as society determines they should, in the hope that men won't hiss obscenities at us and that their hands respect the boundaries of our bodies. We plead, what if I were your wife, your sister, or your daughter? Always the focus is on the woman, the object of the obscenities and the assaults. Does she not deserve safe passage in public space unless she is someone's mother, wife, daughter, or sister? Does she not deserve safe passage in a public space unless she's identified by her relationship to a man? We should instead be exposing and shaming the boys and men who would deny us that safety, and instead of asking, what if I were your mother, your wife, blah, 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 we should instead be asking, what if the predator were your husband, brother, or son? The people who make our lives hell on the street are men we know. They are men we are related to, and they should be the object of scrutiny instead of us. Soon after that centre's report was published, I wrote an op-ed for a privately owned Egyptian Arabic language daily newspaper called Al-Masri Al-Yawm, in which I noted some of the several times I had been groped, been followed by strangers in their cars, and had a stranger expose his genitals to in my presence. The newspaper's online comment section was filled with remarks by men who asked me things like this: who do you think you are? Who would want to grope you? As if being sexually assaulted was a fucking compliment. And of course you get groped. What did you expect? You took your hijab off. In response to my writing that I was just 4 years old when a man first exposed his genitals to me, 4 years old. He had parked his car on our street in Cairo, pulled out his penis in front of me and a friend who also was a toddler, and beckoned for us to come down from the balcony on which we were standing. 4 years old. One reader actually took the time to find my email address so that he could write to ask me, and I quote, "What was so special about you as a 4-year-old that anyone would want to show you his penis? Can you fucking believe it?" I was stunned at the male rage that flooded the comment section. Surely that rage should be ours, should belong to women. The few women who did respond left comments chiding those men who couldn't believe how widespread street sexual harassment in Egypt had become. One woman asked, "Ask your wife, ask your sister, ask your mother." One or two women told the enraged men something I hope terrified those men. Every morning before I leave the house, I keep my headscarf in place with pins. Those pins become my weapons against your hands on transport and on the street. To which I say, fuck yes, sister, fuck yes. Almost every part of my body has been groped or touched without my consent. These assaults happened in Saudi Arabia, where I lived as a teenager, and in Egypt, where I returned to live at the age of 21. The Egyptian state, first forced its hands on my body on Mohammed Mahmoud Street, where in November of 2011, 5 days of clashes occurred between demonstrators trying to protect Tahrir Square and the soldiers and the police, who attacked the families of revolutionaries and burned the tents of peaceful protesters. The details of what happened to me mattered little to the ER nurse after I was finally released of the hospital, where about 16 hours after riot police had broken my arms and sexually assaulted me, I went to get medical care. When I told her what had happened to me, that I believed my arms were broken and that the riot police sexually assaulted me, she said this to me: "How could you let them do that to you? Why didn't you resist?" This is the fucking ER nurse. She might as well have asked me where my shame was. How could I let riot police sexually assault me? And how could I so brazenly describe what had happened to me? It had been many years since I was a virgin, but she was chiding me for my lack of moral virginity, if you will. A good virgin, a good moral virgin, would have saved herself from those men's hands. A good moral virgin would have saved her breasts and her genitals from their assault. A good moral virgin would not have been there on Mohammed Mahmoud Street in the first place. Finally, a good moral virgin would not have so openly described how she was sexually assaulted. Fuck your virginity. Fuck it. I told her in response, when you're surrounded by 4 or 5 men from the riot police and they're beating you with sticks this long, there isn't much resisting you can do. Sister, I've spoken often about my sexual assault, usually with mechanical detachment. At first I spoke in order to expose and shame not just the men who assaulted me, but also the regime that had trained them to do so, that had set them as attack dogs on me and at least 12 other women on Mohammed Mahmoud Street. Divide and conquer takes on a new meaning when you tug on the jacket of the supervising officer who, as he witnesses his riot policemen groping every part of your body, he assures you nonetheless that you are safe because he will protect you. Then, after he says he will protect you, in the very next breath, he threatens you with gang rape by another group of his riot policemen amassed close by and shaking their fists at you. Fuck protection. I don't want to be protected. I want to be free. Still, I needed a body, however imperfect and unreliable, between me and the men who were grabbing at me. I needed to believe that there was an authority figure who could protect me. I needed to pretend that the supervising officer meant what he said, even as his lie was demonstrated on my body, being sexually assaulted in front of him. I have needed to say this over and over for my own reckoning with what I survived. And also because I came to learn that this pattern of assault, promises of protection as the assault is happening, alternating with threats of gang rape, how fucking twisted, was a modus operandi that they had been used on other women during the battle with security forces on Mohammed Mahmoud Street. I am pausing here to tell you that I am on the verge of tears even though I am yelling. Because reading my own words out loud is a reminder of what I endured and also what I survived. Fuck this shit. Fuck these fascists. Fuck their protection. I do not want to be protected. I want to be free. Women have fought alongside men in political revolutions that have toppled dictators. But once these regimes fell, women have looked around to find the same oppression, sometimes inflicted by the men they stood shoulder to shoulder with, by men who claimed to be protecting them. Listen to Donya and Mayeda, two 19-year-old women from a working-class Cairo neighborhood whom I interviewed for my radio documentary. Quote, "We had a revolution to improve our lives and things have gotten worse. It's dangerous to walk the streets. We don't feel safe at all. Our lives have not improved and none of the things we wanted from the revolution have been achieved," Donya told me. Men around here look at us like we're products in a shop. We have no rights. If you complain, no one listens to you and you could suffer the consequences of complaining. I want women to have a respected position and not to be considered a product you can buy in a shop, Donya said. Mayeda told me, "Our society by and large says your position as a woman in Egypt is in your home, not outside. So women are not considered equal to men, and a lot of men don't give you the respect you deserve. A lot of men don't make you feel like you belong outside with them. They tell you that your place is at home." Just before I met Donya and Mayeda, producer Gemma Newby and I had gone to a 5-star hotel for an event called Igmedi, which means toughen up, in which women were taught the basics of self-defense and given a mood boost with dancing and Zumba exercises. The hall where the event was held was filled with mostly young women in their late teens and early 20s. Some older women had brought their daughters with them. All the women I spoke to for the radio documentary complained of constant verbal and physical sexual abuse on the streets and of an overall feeling that they were not safe in Cairo. Though there are many class disparities in Egypt, many, and the rich are cushioned by several privileges, street sexual harassment spares no one, rich or poor. Once your feet are on the street, it matters little whether you can afford to attend an event at a 5-star hotel or if you live in a working class neighborhood that does not even have a police precinct. Being a woman anywhere is dangerous. The regimes that governed the Arab world before the recent revolutions were united in an utter disregard for women's bodily integrity, a message that was not lost on the male public, who reflected back a similar disregard. Lack of accountability left both state and street, misogyny to grow unchecked, producing the horrific incidents of sexual violence that recur day after day. Unless we draw the connection between the misogyny of the state and of the street, and unless we emphasize the need for a social and a sexual revolution, our political revolutions will fail. One more time. Unless we draw the connection between the misogyny of the state and of the street, and unless we emphasize the need for a social and a sexual revolution, our political revolutions will fail. Just as important, women will never be free to live as autonomous citizens whose bodily integrity is safe inside and outside of their home. We deserve to be free. I do not want to be protected. I want to be free. Fuck the patriarchy. That was a very cathartic reading for me. I was sincerely on the verge of tears as I was getting louder and louder, and I truly feel it has passed. So thank you for joining me for this Mona Reads. Thank you for hearing my words. This was a very difficult book to read. You can see why. Thank you for sharing my words, for listening to my words, and do come back next Tuesday for more from Headscarves and Hymens, why the Middle East needs a sexual revolution. And remember to always join me when I say, fuck the patriarchy. Be well.